In one of the world's wealthiest nations, with sun-soaked cities and a thriving economy, thousands of Australians are sleeping rough or living without stable shelter. How did it come to this? Despite its high standard of living, Australia faces a growing homelessness crisis fueled by skyrocketing living costs, an unforgiving housing market, and gaps in social support systems. This video unpacks the complex layers behind this issue, exploring economic pressures, housing affordability, policy failures, and personal struggles. It's time to look beyond the surface and understand why so many Australians are being left behind. Subscribe and let's discover what's behind this growing crisis. One of the primary drivers of homelessness in Australia is the economic landscape. Rising living costs, stagnant wages, and economic inequality have created conditions where many Australians struggle to afford basic necessities, including housing. The cost of living in Australia has surged over the past decade, particularly in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne. Essentials such as food, healthcare, utilities, and transportation have become significantly more expensive, outpacing wage growth and eroding disposable incomes. While Australia often boasts low unemployment rates, underemployment remains a critical issue. Many individuals work part-time or in precarious jobs that do not provide sufficient income or job security, increasing their vulnerability to housing instability. Economic disparities have widened, with wealth concentrated among a small segment of the population. This inequality exacerbates social divisions and limits opportunities for affordable housing for lower-income groups. The housing market crisis. The Australian housing market plays a central role in the nation's growing homelessness crisis. A complex mix of skyrocketing property prices, rental affordability challenges, and a severe shortage of public housing has left countless Australians without secure, stable housing options. Home ownership, once considered a cornerstone of the Australian dream, has become out of reach for many. Exorbitant property prices have created significant barriers, particularly for young people, single-income households, and low-wage workers who find it nearly impossible to save for a deposit or qualify for a mortgage. For those who rent, the situation is equally hard. A large proportion of Australians experience rental stress, defined as spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. This financial strain leaves little room for other essential expenses like food, healthcare, and transportation, making individuals and families highly vulnerable to homelessness when unexpected financial shocks occur, such as job loss or medical emergencies. Compounding these issues is the critical shortage of public housing. Australia's public housing stock has failed to keep pace with growing demand, resulting in long waiting lists and limited availability. Vulnerable populations, including low-income families, the elderly, and people with disabilities, often find themselves unable to access the support they desperately need. This lack of affordable housing options creates a bottleneck, leaving many with no choice but to rely on temporary shelters, couch surfing, or, in the worst cases, living on the streets. The housing crisis, therefore, remains a key driver of homelessness across the country. Social and policy factors. Government policies and social support systems play a critical role in shaping the prevalence of homelessness in Australia. While the country has established various welfare programs aimed at supporting vulnerable populations, significant gaps and inefficiencies within these systems contribute to the growing crisis. One of the key issues is the inadequacy of social welfare payments. Programs like Job Seeker and Youth Allowance often fall short of covering the actual costs of living, particularly in urban areas where housing expenses are substantially higher. This financial shortfall leaves many individuals and families struggling to meet basic needs, pushing them closer to the brink of homelessness. Additionally, there are notable policy gaps, especially in areas concerning mental health, domestic violence, and substance abuse. These issues are often interconnected with homelessness, yet the policies designed to address them frequently lack the integration and comprehensive support required to tackle the root causes effectively. As a result, individuals facing complex challenges may fall through the cracks, unable to access the holistic care and resources they need to maintain stable housing. Furthermore, the lack of preventive measures exacerbates the problem. Early intervention programs, such as rent assistance, financial counseling, and crisis support services, are essential for stopping homelessness before it starts. However, these programs are often underfunded, understaffed, or inaccessible to those who need them most. Without robust preventive strategies, many at-risk individuals are left without the necessary support to navigate financial hardships or personal crises, ultimately leading to increased rates of homelessness across the country. Personal and structural vulnerabilities. Homelessness is not solely an economic issue. It is also deeply influenced by personal circumstances and structural vulnerabilities that create complex pathways into housing instability. Mental health issues play a significant role, acting both as a cause and a consequence of homelessness. Individuals grappling with mental health conditions often face difficulties in maintaining employment, relationships, and consistent routines, all of which are critical for stable housing. The lack of accessible, comprehensive mental health services exacerbates this problem, leaving many without the support needed to manage their conditions and retain secure accommodation. Domestic and family violence is another leading cause of homelessness, particularly among women and children in Australia. Survivors often have to make the harrowing decision to leave unsafe environments without having secure housing alternatives. This abrupt displacement can initiate cycles of homelessness, as the trauma and financial instability associated with fleeing abuse create long-term barriers to regaining stable housing. Emergency shelters and crisis accommodations, while vital, are often temporary solutions and may not meet the long-term needs of survivors seeking safety and stability. Substance abuse also contributes significantly to homelessness. Dependency on drugs or alcohol can lead to job loss, strained or broken relationships, and severe financial difficulties, all of which undermine housing security. Moreover, individuals experiencing homelessness may turn to substances as a coping mechanism, creating a vicious cycle that is difficult to break without comprehensive support. These personal and structural vulnerabilities highlight the need for holistic, integrated approaches to address the multifaceted nature of homelessness. The impact of the pandemic. The pandemic significantly exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and introduced new challenges for Australians facing homelessness. The economic disruption caused by the pandemic was swift and severe, with widespread job losses and reduced working hours pushing countless individuals and families into financial distress. Many who had previously maintained stable housing found themselves struggling to cover rent and basic living expenses, increasing their risk of homelessness virtually overnight. For those already living on the margins, the pandemic further eroded their financial security, leaving them with few options for support. Temporary eviction moratoriums implemented during the pandemic provided crucial short-term relief for renters unable to meet their housing costs. However, these measures also masked deeper systemic issues within the housing market. Once these protections expired, many Australians faced a sudden and renewed risk of eviction, often with accumulated rental debts that proved insurmountable. The aftermath of these moratoriums highlighted how fragile housing security could be for those living paycheck to paycheck with limited safety nets in place. Additionally, the pandemic increased the visibility of homelessness in Australia. Lockdowns and public health restrictions underscored the precarious living conditions of those without stable housing, as access to shelters, public spaces, and essential services became more restricted. This heightened awareness brought greater public attention to the crisis, revealing the extent to which homelessness is not just an isolated issue, but a widespread societal challenge. The pandemic, therefore, served as both a magnifying glass and a catalyst, exposing and intensifying the structural weaknesses that drive homelessness across the country. Indigenous homelessness. Indigenous Australians experience homelessness at disproportionately high rates, a reality rooted in historical injustices and perpetuated by systemic disadvantages. The legacy of colonization has had a profound and lasting impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Historical displacement, driven by the forced removal of people from their traditional lands and the breakdown of established community structures, disrupted cultural practices, social cohesion, and traditional ways of living. This disconnection from ancestral lands and kinship networks has created long-term housing instability that continues to affect generations. Systemic discrimination further compounds these challenges. Indigenous Australians often face barriers in accessing secure housing, stable employment, and quality education due to ingrained biases within institutions and broader societal structures. This discrimination limits economic opportunities, restricts access to essential services, and increases vulnerability to homelessness. The challenges aren't just economic, they're also deeply embedded in social and structural inequalities that have been perpetuated over time. Moreover, the concept of homelessness for many Indigenous Australians goes beyond the absence of physical shelter. It encompasses a broader cultural and spiritual disconnection, including the loss of ties to land, family, and community. This cultural definition reflects the importance of place and belonging in Indigenous identities, where being disconnected from one's country or community is itself a form of homelessness. Addressing homelessness within Indigenous communities, therefore, requires holistic, culturally sensitive approaches that recognize the significance of land. Youth homelessness. Young people face unique challenges that significantly increase their risk of homelessness in Australia. One of the most common factors is family conflict, which often manifests as family breakdowns, abuse, or neglect. For many young people, home is not a safe or supportive environment, and escaping these situations can leave them without a stable place to live. This vulnerability is especially acute for those experiencing domestic violence, strained parental relationships, or situations where their identity, such as sexual orientation or gender identity, is not accepted at home. Transition challenges also play a critical role, particularly for young people aging out of the foster care system or exiting juvenile justice facilities. Many of these individuals lack the necessary support networks, life skills, or financial stability to secure and maintain housing on their own. Without proper guidance and transitional support, they can quickly fall into homelessness as they struggle to navigate the demands of adulthood without a safety net. Furthermore, educational disruptions are both a cause and consequence of youth homelessness. Experiencing homelessness often leads to school absenteeism, decreased academic performance, and, in some cases, dropping out entirely. This disruption severely limits future employment opportunities, perpetuating cycles of disadvantage and making it even harder to achieve financial independence and stable housing. Addressing youth homelessness requires targeted interventions, including family support services, transitional housing programs, and educational support. Addressing homelessness requires a multifaceted approach that combines immediate relief with long-term structural changes. Increasing the supply of affordable housing through government investment and incentives for private developers is crucial. Integrated support services that address mental health, substance abuse, and domestic violence can help individuals maintain stable housing. Reforms to social welfare programs, tenancy laws, and early intervention strategies can prevent homelessness before it occurs. Non-governmental organizations play a vital role in providing frontline services and advocating for policy changes. Homelessness in Australia is a complex issue rooted in economic, social, and personal factors. While the challenges are significant, they are not insurmountable. Through coordinated efforts involving government policies, community support, and individual resilience, Australia can move towards a future where everyone has access to safe, stable, and affordable housing. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video. See you soon.